All right, I think we'll probably go ahead and get started. Hi, thanks everyone for coming. We're going to have a wonderful talk today. At least I hope it comes out that way. We're going to be talking about latency, what we can do, what are some of the challenges, where things are going, all that type of goodness. This is actually technically a joint presentation between myself. My name's David Hassoun. I'm the CEO of RealEyes Media. June Heider is also here to help answer questions and has helped put together some information and helped us build some cool little testing apps as we kind of went through this. And Ozer as well from Streaming Learners, et cetera. He's also one of the contributing authors at Streaming Media and has done a ton of awesome work when it comes to encoding. Details all around that. Books, one of my favorite ones out there. Go get them. He has a new one and also a really cool book on H.265 encoding or FFmpeg in 30 minutes. Actually has a section on H.265 encoding for free. It's good. Get it? Like it? As we kind of get going, we're going to talk about a number of things today. We'll see where things kind of go and also hopefully get some questions answered and give you guys some idea of what's some things that you can kind of do. So first thing we're going to do is kind of talk about, okay, when we're talking about latency, what do we mean? Because it actually does have multiple interpretations, and also when we start talking about low latency, what does that mean, and so forth. And then we're going to talk about what are the ways that we can actually achieve reducing our latency. Where are our key areas that we need to focus on? What can you control? What can't you control? What are some of the big pictures with this? And go from there. So as we get going, I'll start also telling you guys what we're not going to really be focusing on. There are a lot of low latency capabilities and solutions when it comes to smaller scale. So a lot of times we're talking about like real-time collaboration stuff, one-to-one, one-to-few, that type of things. That's less of what we really focus on for this presentation. Here we're going to be talking a little bit more about larger scale. Like, hey, okay, great, I need to be able to deliver a lot of people content. How am I going to be able to achieve that? That doesn't mean we're not going to be able to talk about that. Doesn't mean I also can't answer some questions on some of the other stuff. But I'm just trying to give you guys a bit of the lay of the land, what we're going to kind of focus on a little bit more and whatnot. So first off, when we just start talking about low latency, right? It's interesting when you talk to people how you can get really different answers of what that means. What does low latency mean to you? What does low latency mean to me? And even then, when we actually even finally agree that we're talking about the same thing, interpretations of what low latency goals are can be completely different and very, very wide spectrum. So we're going to try to get some goals and guidelines around some of this as well. Latency can be seen as things like time to video play. So that's more like startup time. But that impacts also what is often viewed as live latency. So how close am I to real time, right? Hand wave test. I wave my hand on the camera, and you're watching it on your device. How many seconds later do you see that hand wave, right? They are related because if you take longer to start, you're going to most likely have longer also latency in your live, but that isn't completely the whole picture. So we're going to talk a bit about both. We're going to focus quite a bit, some on startup, and then we're going to talk about what really is happening that's increasing the latency overall and how we can start to try to achieve reducing both of those in a couple different ways. Now, when we actually try to start defining this, Wowza did a really cool presentation previously, and I borrowed this slide, credited them appropriately. That's always nice. But they've actually been doing a really bunch of cool stuff lately on the Wowza platform as a whole when it comes to low latency. We're going to talk a little bit about what they've been doing across the board, their new kind of protocol that they're using called the WOWS protocol and other stuff as well. But they created this nice little visual that helps to start kind of define what the industry generally accepts, and there's still variances on this a little bit, as far as latency and real-time discussions. So when we look at normal streaming today, which in my book is HTTP based, so HLS primarily. Let's say Dash, throw it in there too, because I wish Dash was even more prevalent than it is. But HLS being the primary one that we work with all the time. Normal delivery, normal latency is 30 to 45 seconds plus, right? That's if you're doing a pretty good job, you're going to see around that type of latency. Reduced latency is anywhere from 18 to 5 seconds, and that's where a lot of people wish they were, but aren't oftentimes. Low latency, really we count that as anything less than 10 seconds. 5 seconds is the typical latency for cable, HD cable. So we're talking action on the field to seeing it on your TV screen, not going through the internet, is actually about a 5-second latency from lens to screen. And then, so anything at that or below is considered close enough to real time. If you're beating the TV, then you're doing something really right. and you're probably doing it very dangerously. Low latency is anywhere from some people consider it less than 10 down to 2 to 3 seconds, and then real time, anything less than real time normally is considered less than 1 second, but there's even terms and different standards that count that differently. Ultimately, what I'm trying to say is there's no real set information, but there's these kind of bucket guidelines, right, where we're at today and we want to get better, and how are we going to kind of start to achieve that? So how we're going to break this down, we're going to say standards are traditional is 30 seconds plus, low latency is 10 seconds or less, which is our goal is to get us a 1 to 2 seconds difference from TV. TV, I said, can be 5 seconds. That was what it was in the last one. We've seen that where it can be up to 6 to 8 as well. And then ultra low latency is anything less than 3 seconds, right? If your goal of being here today is ultra low latency, sorry, go have a beer. That's not going to be our focus. The goal with ultra low latency and where you actually achieve that is normally in the one-to-one, one-to-few situation. That's where you're going to be utilizing things like WebRTC or some type of socket protocol, and it doesn't scale terribly well at an effective route. We're going to talk about why, and we're going to see why that doesn't happen so much there. So ultimately, when we start talking about our wonderful latency goals and how we want to have stuff just going super fast, super smooth, and not buffer, we have to really kind of consider what are the 3 kind of areas that we're working with here, right? So we have our goal is low latency, but we need to balance that out with our level of quality that we want and the scale, right? If you want really low latency and high quality, you can relatively achieve that. You just can't do that at a very large scale without massive cost of infrastructure, and then the scale becomes a challenge in itself. Or you can have large scale and low latency, but it's going to look really bad, right? Or poor quality, and that costs go down to your experience as well, and even that can be an interesting challenge. Or you can have high quality and large scale. That's more of what we do today, right? That's the norm. That's where we're getting 30 to 45 second latency, utilizing standard systems, CDNs, or good caching systems, and so forth as it is. So you have to start figuring out where's going to be your balance to find that middle spot, get in that middle range, and hopefully be able to get to the sub 10 second realm. When we're talking about a larger scale delivery. So how I've always kind of viewed the main key factors, how they get broken out when we start talking about low latency, is you have the player, you have the content, you have the delivery. And we're going to see some information of how this really distributed across there. Some people like to think like all you have to do is adjust what you have in the player side, and you're going to be able to have much more low latency content. Well, that's a part. That's the start of it. Oftentimes we don't realize how much actually happens in just either the delivery if it's large scale, or even just in the content, the packaging, right? What's the delay factors that happen there? So in the player, we have things like, what's our initial buffer, right? That's going to make our startup time big difference. Are we doing initial bitrate selection, or is it automated? What's the manifest size? How much data does it have to process just to get going? And of course, the bandwidth, right? Last mile. No matter what, last mile is going to hurt us or help us one way or another. Content, we have things like segment size, bit rate, encoding, and packaging, and we're going to talk about that, as well as ways that content is starting to change in some of this. And then also delivery. What's our protocol? What's our caching? What's our scale? These are things that really are also an interesting topic area right now with protocol and so forth. And we're going to see that not all this is also just on the users accessing this, but it's also how we're getting it to our encoders or how we're getting it to our CDNs. Those protocols there matter a big difference. If anyone sat in the SRT session a little bit ago, that's some of that stuff that kind of comes up within there. We'll talk briefly about that as well. And then let's just look at this. This is something we're going to come back to later on, but this is traditional content packaging as is today, in the concept that, hey, most commonly, when we're talking about relatively normal latent stuff, so this is sports driven even today. So I know some major sports broadcasters. We do a lot of work with NBC Sports. You could go out and look at their manifest and see that they use a 6-second segment, right? I don't know if they have a 2-second keyframe interval, but I think that's what they use. So 6-second segment, 2-segment keyframe interval. Keep in mind, no matter what, you actually have to encode 6 seconds of content before it's even made available, as in updated the manifest saying, hey, this content is now available, to be able to get that. Now, this all happens before it ever even attempts to go to the CDN, right? Or anywhere else. So it means you're always being 6 seconds back from content, even if they could access it immediately when it was ready, right? This starts causing what's one of the initial challenges right now. Why are they using 6-second segments? Well, if they use a lot smaller segments, there's other issues that are going to come up. We'll dig into that. So Harmonic actually had some really cool information of breaking stuff out. With actually dealing with content, where's your time being distributed to be able to deliver it? So here it's latency in seconds on the left-hand side. And we have HLS 6-second fragments, HLS 2-second fragments, and broadcast. Broadcast meaning we don't work with fragments. It's just a straight up stream. And you can see encoding and packaging, no matter what, still attributes to a decent amount of your time that actually has to take place, right? So even if you decrease your segment size, which is the most common approach for low latency, at least out of box, is, hey, drop that down to a 2-second segment size. That helps, but it doesn't solve everything. That does cut out a pretty big chunk, right? But you still have other factors in there, and even then you can actually have an increase in your CDN network issues and other stuff depending on how they're set up. So content, we can adjust that, but that isn't going to solve everything. We need to also look at this at a broader spectrum as well if we really want to get there. Because if we go down 2-second segment, okay, cool. Well, we might be able to hit the close to 15-second mark. You know, you can get, if you're really lucky, 12-second, but most likely you're going to be a little bit above that. So that's one element there. And why these things add up is when we actually look at like delivery, you know, one, you have to worry about what your ingest protocols are. Is it going TCP just to get encoded somewhere over the internet, or is it satellite and the cost associated with that? But even then, once you get it to your encoder, you know, you have to encode it. You're generally going to do well, ingest, encode, transcode. Then you have your mid-tier origin, your origin shield, out to your edge cache, client, your buffer. Or you can go encoder, packager, ingest, origin ingest cache, edge cache, client buffer. It has a lot of steps the content ends up going through if you're actually doing some larger scale stuff, utilizing the CDNs. If you don't have a CDN, you still have to worry about ingest, encode, package, origin, and then some type of caching layer in most cases. And your player, you also have to consider what your pushback from live is, your initial buffer. Pushback from live is how close do I want to try to start playing? Because if I always try to play like, hey, I want to just load the last fragment and play that, you will have buffer issues due to fluctuation in normal internet, especially over TCP. And your buffer is how you balance that. So as I mentioned, the most generic solution for low latency without kind of doing a larger review of your whole system is pretty straightforward. Is that you're generally going to try to target between a 1 to 2 second segment, meaning your keyframe interval is also lined up with that. You're going to want to use a rolling limited DVR. You don't want to have a 5-hour event and a 5-hour full DVR manifest because it's too much processing that you're asking it to do too often. So normally you want to limit that to anywhere between no less than, I would say, 10 segments or around 30 seconds. And you're going to start playback after anywhere from 1 to 6 segments. Now, starting playback, oftentimes you have to have at least 3 segments. That depends on the player and the platform that you're using. You can go less than that. It's dangerous. Be careful. I wouldn't ever do 1 segment. I would say you could, we start playback after 1 segment or less, but we will never load segments closer than 2 to 3 from live point, and oftentimes more if you're using a much smaller segment size. I've seen people work with less than 1 second segments. We even did some tests on that. It wasn't pretty. Don't normally recommend that. There are use cases for it, but at a larger, kind of more generic scale, without going to specifics for individuals, I wouldn't normally recommend less than a 1 second segment. And 2 is kind of the industry norm for lower latency. The issues just with using the above, some of the dangers, buffer starve. I mean, you're getting too close to your live point and you're running out of your buffer. Or you didn't buffer enough in the first place and it's not able to fill it up as necessary with the network. You're going to have more network overhead. There's more requests, all right? So now we're making 3 requests at minimum that what used to be 1, right? Any type of latency or fluctuation is going to have a greater chance, for the most part, of impacting that. There's also more potential load on the CPU, GPU due to also increased keyframes, as well as more parsing, depending once again also like what frameworks you're using, what video players. If you're doing this stuff on HTML5 with things like HLS.js, it's more processing it has to do on each fragment that is coming in, even though it's offloading to some of that to web workers and so forth. Your encoding packaging, making sure you have those aligned properly. It's also going to have to do more work on its own, more caching overhead, and more potential delivery race conditions, just because you're doing more quickly. So we actually tried to do a bunch of testing and have some fun with this session ahead of time. We did a bunch. We actually made a Roku app, an Android app, a Fire TV app, and a web app. All that allowed us to test different latency factors, and then all leveraged the exact same content, and all reported back to something that we could actually get all the results quickly, and not just have it be stopwatch, right? And we're going to share some of those results with you guys, and if it's something that you guys end up really wanting to see those apps, it's something that we'll actually probably, we're considering just open sourcing those applications and continue to develop on those for other people to mess around with them too. So as I mentioned, these are the kind of things we did. We also did a quality of service overlay on all of them, allowed us to specify things like where do we want to start in manifest, what if we want to specify initial bit rates, and also just how do things benchmark out of default. We're using the default media players or XO player on Android to give us a kind of a baseline for how these things do out of box, depending on what we want to feed it. We gave everything just this JSON file that we were able to kind of compile up what we had there. So different rendition ladders that we wanted to use, what start times we want to use, adaptation modes we want to use for things like on Roku, and be able to essentially do a lot of testing pretty quickly with this, and then we just add more content to this whenever we want. Ooh, other way, right? And then we actually have all this stuff report down to a unified spreadsheet, so we could see and aggregate all our test results really, really quickly. All this goes into a database where we'll pull that out and so forth. And actually, this is what the browser application looked like. So we used HLS.js underneath. This is the JSON file broken out into all the different content that we wanted to be able to test, even having some H.265 tests in here. And you know, when we select anything, we're able to execute a test. We can see our QoS information. Once it starts playback, we send off all the tracking information so we can see what's going on. And this thing also works for live, but these ones are actually mostly VOD content. So we'll see some of these results as we go in here as well. And we also were tracking things like from initializing, selecting content on Roku to playback, as well as from when the screen initializes. So we could really see the different steps of how time really was affecting to, especially startup time, but then being able to actually lever this stuff further as well. So we made some pretty cool resources, and we're going to be sharing those with you guys. Anyway, here are some of the initial just kind of out-of-the-box results that we saw with just the baseline. So hey, okay, great. If we just kind of push this stuff in, what's our startup times across the board for our different bit rates? Later on, we're going to see how that actually starts to change when we use different settings, so different segment sizes and so forth. This shows just a little bit of what some of these apps looks like on the different devices. All of them had a similar display overlay, and the key thing is they all track the data underneath. So we'll look a little bit at those data results, and if you guys want to talk more about those apps later on, we can. But now let's start actually diving a little bit into some of the key areas. So we're going to cover, like I said, the three ones: delivery, content, and player. So starting off with delivery, how I at least view this is there's generally two primary different ways that we can look at our delivery. And where things are going, what they have options now, and where it's going to be headed towards in the future. We have persistent and non-persistent delivery options. So these also are based off of connections as well. So non-persistent, that's what we have today as our primary. That's generally TCP based. There is also byte range and chunking. So that's going to be HTTP 1.1. And that starts across the barrier even a little bit, the HTTP chunking, a little bit into some persistent stuff, which we're going to see. The new chunking options that you can do to help actually deal with a lot of issues with low latency are really powerful and pretty cool. On the persistent side, there's things like WebSockets, WebRTC. The concept is taking these to UDP, and in the future, now even knowing what we can do with HTTP 2. We actually started putting together some tests for that as well. SRT for your ingest, or QUIC for your playback. We'll touch on all these through this presentation at least a little bit and understand those. A lot of things are taking stuff now to using WebSockets as the primary data channel to deliver out the bytes in a persistent connected situation. That's like how the Wowza protocol is doing it, the WOWS protocol, and other ones are actually starting to leverage that as well, and it offers some pretty cool capabilities. WebRTC, like I said, we're not going to go real deep in that. If you're looking to do kind of more one-to-one level, that can be really valuable. It's been a difficult system in what we've seen to work with. Here's a cool bit of information. This was actually from one of the articles Jan had put together a while back. And it's some of the benefits of working with persistent versus non-persistent connections in regards to segment lengths and effective media throughput. So ultimately, one of the big problems with non-persistent connections is their kind of open-closed situation, how they work, and just general throughput capability. You can see with a non-persistent connection, we actually get the optimal range right around that 6-second mark. So anywhere between 5 to 8 seconds. 6 seconds is probably one of the most common, I think, that I've seen in the industry for use. However, when we start going to persistent connections, we're able to get really good effectiveness on much smaller. In fact, we get better effectiveness on much smaller. In a persistent connection, that means that we're going to establish a connection to the server that we're pulling this content down from, and it's going to stay open for the time that we want and need it for, and expand that. This is where things like HTTP2 comes into play, socket connections, and more realms that we can start leveraging on the UDP side as well. So when we start breaking this stuff out, what we can kind of do on both these, and some of the stuff actually, the CMAF chunks and the LHLS stuff actually starts to branch a little bit into the persistent realm a bit more. But on the persistent side, we're going to talk about both of those. And like I said, you kind of say they're persistent, not just non-persistent, at least where they're headed. Right now, they're a little bit more persistent, but there's transfer over. And then on the persistent side, it's all about the infrastructure. Do you have that capability to use HTTP2, or are you going to set up WebSockets and then build this stuff out on top of it, or leverage something like the WOWS protocol? Or are you integrating with something that's going to offer that for you? So for instance, Akamai has their advanced media solutions and their Media Service Live 4.0 stuff. That's really pretty powerful and really interesting. They help to try to handle this across the whole chain. So here's an example of what they actually put together for NBC Sports and some of the demo stuff that they did there to achieve around 10 seconds latency for HTTPS ingested format and be able to deliver worldwide, right? Or at least worldwide if geo rules aren't on. And if you look, the concept I wanted to show here is that this does have a lot it has to do. They're addressing this actually on multiple realms, starting right off as to the ingest servers, not using TCP there, going to UDP-based connections. That's where things like SRT can be really, really valuable and so forth. That reduces some of the initial latency, getting it into your delivery system. Then from your ingest servers, this can go to your mid-tiers, your origin shield, and then your actual adaptive media delivery. And then the last mile, they also are using things like Quick on Chrome and also socket-based connections on native apps. And they have SDKs that supply that for across the board. And it can offer some pretty cool capabilities and get latency much lower down on a full managed system that's worldwide and very powerful. So that can be something that's of high use. So ultimately, you're going to come down to kind of two choices. You have your traditional HTTP TCP stuff, so that's going to be very reliable, but more overhead and slower. Or you can go socket, which is going to be faster, more complex, or persistent based, right? Right now, those are kind of the main routes that you can choose from. There are a lot of outliers and bleeding that you can kind of look to do, but that's going to be kind of the key thing. So that's where you're seeing the solutions that are actually rolling out today a bit more happening. And then you can supplement those with a lot of other things that are happening. So let's talk a little bit about the player. So as we mentioned, one of the first things if you're looking to do, and the easiest way to get some quick wins if your goal is low latency, is segment size and keyframe interval, right? Concept is, as always, players are going to download a number of segments before they start playback. Longer segments are going to take longer to load. So considering what your size of the segments are, and if you can configure it, how many segments you're going to require it to load before playback begins, or how far back you're going to say to load, become really valuable. Apple's always said 6-second segments. Originally, they used to say 10-second segments, and they wanted 3 segments loaded, so it was a 30-second automatic just from what was broadcasted to be able to come in, and even then you could be further back once it loaded those 3 segments to be able to play. But Apple hasn't really chimed in quite as much on any low latency type of solutions. They're all about quality. We want to maintain brand. Buffer, you may need to increase the number of segments received before playback starts to avoid buffering. Some of the interesting stuff is on the new Wowza side, they were actually recommending to have a lot more segments that you download up front before you start playback, but they're also so much smaller, right? So they're saying, well, get 6 to 10 1 second or less segments loaded in. But that gives you enough kind of leadway so that you can bleed up forward and still be able to play out. The ultimate challenge here is that you want to be as close to live as possible. The closer to live you are, the more dangerous it is. In my experience, I don't like to have less than 3 to 4 seconds. That's the bare minimum to my live point. That's assuming if we have closer to 1 second fragments. I usually still try to target around 2 to 3 fragments from my live point. So oftentimes it can be up to 6 seconds from live. But we'll start playback immediately after the first segment's loaded. So we're not going to load 6 seconds of content. We will load potentially 2 to 4 seconds of content with one in the barrel to be loaded and go from there. So here's some more of our wonderful test results when we started kind of messing around with things and we started adjusting keyframe and segment sizes. Segment on the left, keyframe interval on the right. For the most part, we just went ahead and lined those up until we got further on, and we were able to see some of the test results. A good thing to take away from here is Roku is a pain in the butt. I don't know. Actually, Roku wasn't too bad on this one. Normally, their starter times are actually pretty bad. Fire TV was a little bit actually higher on us across the board.
I think especially with the Roku, Fire TV, and iOS, it was a lot more dependent on the network connection than it was on the content coming in.
Right. In the browser, one of the things I would note why we are actually able to see this in general, much smaller numbers, is we have a lot more control on the browser side. We were able to bypass a lot of the rules that Apple tries to normally inflict on some of the other stuff. Huh?
That's with the cache turned on, which most users would have.
Yep. So that was with also caching.
David, can you go back?
Yeah.
So could you talk about the results? Because it looks to me, and this it's been a distributed effort. Let's put it nicely that way. But it looks like you're not seeing a significant startup latency decrease by going to half a second.
No, we ran into some players actually airing out when we did half a second ones. Where
we'll go ahead and discuss. I mean, tell us what the findings are for the individual platforms. How do you gauge those results? What do they mean to you?
To me, the main thing that I gathered out of this is that, so we were testing this on a fairly high-speed network. When we so our issue wasn't the latency of loading the fragments, and the size of the fragments mattered little because we had plenty of bandwidth. So it was able to process good, and for the most part, we actually saw relatively level amount of stuff. Although things like you notice on smaller fragment sizes on Fire TV, where it has to do more processing, we were able to see a generally much higher number on the much lower fragments as we went down to larger fragments. So the processing on the devices does actually have some level of impact. And you can see that relatively close. The Roku, it was still pretty high on the half-second ones. Everything was, for the most part, a little bit higher, except for the browser. The browser didn't have much problem, but the browser is where we had a lot of crash, right?
So the difference between the connected devices and the browsers, that the browser's cache has the ability to cache content, and the browser itself had a more robust network connection.
So is the conclusion that your tests were inconclusive? Because we're not seeing a significant difference between the half second and the 6.2.
Right. Well, the point is that, in my opinion, what this comes through is that the conclusion is the actual size of the segments don't affect your startup time as much. Right? That's not the problem here. That's assuming that you have plenty of bandwidth. If you don't have plenty of bandwidth, then there is going to potentially be a difference between I have to load, 5 megabytes of content versus 1 megabyte of content, or something similar on those lines, and how quick that can happen. This one, we had plenty of network throughput, so it wasn't as much of an issue on there. And we were able to see, okay, great. Either way, it's able to start relatively close to the same amount of time, regardless of our segment size. But this doesn't correlate then to, what this doesn't show is, what does that mean as actually getting to your live point, and how's it going to be able to persist across that and be able to update that with live content.
But it seems like you would say half a second is just dangerous for a lot of reasons.
I would never do a half second.
Yeah, and a note on the half a second, Phil, who works with us in the back, was kind enough to encode all this stuff for us. Even the encoders had issues with something that small. Like, how many passes did you have to do?
Well, I know Feds would need to do it. That's the tool I like to use.
Point is, if you want to go half second, go for it. Just don't email me saying it didn't work. Has anyone ever done sub-second segments here? How did it work out? Terrible. Thank you, it's not just me.
It crashed things. I
Right.
can try as low as 100 ms, and that was
Yeah.
bizarre.
Yeah. I mean, you also think about, everything from your packaging and your disk I/O level that come in there, your caching requirements, your network requirements, it all adds up super fast. And think about how quick then it needs to load it too, right? And we normally see like on large scale events, you can have an additional half second of latency or more, just of randomness with CDN throughput and so forth. That gives you no margin of error. Because you do that once, you're closer to your live point. It does it a little bit again later, you're buffering. Yeah.
I'm actually thinking about my DVR. We're going from 6 seconds to half a second. That's going to be 12 times more frag files.
Right.
Which, if I've got currently, say, 3,500
Yeah.
chunks in my storage,
Right.
that's going to go over 30,000
Right.
chunks on my storage for a piece of content.
Right. Just managing that stuff, if you ever do have to move it around, it takes incrementally more amount of time to deal with that. So, once again, don't go less than a second. 2 seconds is really a pretty good marker, and it's been seen a lot in the industry too. Less than that, you're rolling the dice, and I'd love to hear how you make it work. Unless you're doing stuff more like bitstream, socket level, and so forth. We're going to talk a little bit about that and see how that stuff could play in there. But actually, those solutions let you avoid that whole problem. So some player size adjustments, general practices. So number of segments loaded before playback start. 1 to 2 when we're doing low latency. Obviously, 2 is actually my target. 3 is what we're doing in larger scale production when we don't have to worry about latency as much. On the other platforms, we generally stick with 3. iOS, they normally try to enforce that, and same with the others. We do try to work around that when we can. With 6-second segments, that's 18 seconds of video, but when you're drawing down a lot less, you're able to really drive that down, of course. So we're talking 6 seconds at the most, in most cases, if that. Ultimately, I don't recommend anything less than 4 seconds in your buffer, or 3, depending on what you have set up. We went down, we wouldn't target more than less than 1 second, and we also tried varying that stuff. So, okay, that's a little bit on the player. I mean, really, you only have the main areas of segment size, buffer, and how much, and not just the total buffer, what you're going to target, but how much you're going to buffer before you start playback. And I think that's a key thing to keep in mind, is that we normally will still have some content that we can load in the future before we start playback if we can. So quick play, right? Because we'll let the network fill that back in, is the theory on that, especially when we're working with some more reasonable segment sizes. So what's at stake? We're talking about the content here. If we're transmuxing, greater number of keyframes and segments may impact CPU requirements. I did mention that. And that's also where, when Phil was doing the encoding, it's not just the keyframes and segments, it's also the file I/O. If you have going down to half seconds, that's a lot of files that you have to start dealing with, and it's going to happen very quickly. And keep in mind, if you're doing ABR, multiply that by your ladder, right? So it adds up pretty fast. Some other things that we can do is modify chunks in real time in the HLS playlist. Less is better. All depends on the segment size. So we're talking about rolling DVR here. So with a lot of customers in the past, we've always had unlimited DVR. It could be a 6-hour sporting event, and you have full DVR access. Doing things that you're not always presenting that can be really viable. We've actually done some interesting stuff in the past where we have the same content that broadcasts out, so we have unlimited DVR and also a rolling DVR window. And we can use some pretty cool stuff to help with this, as to have logic in there that we initialize using the rolling DVR. Once content starts loading up, we actually backfill in the full DVR, so then they have full DVR access. But then moving forward, we load only the rolling DVR and use that to manage client depending on our playlist. The benefits of this is we actually give them full DVR access without every 6 seconds or 2 seconds loading the full manifest file and having the client application process it. This is what you can do when you have a lot more lower level player control, but it can be some pretty cool concept, right? We can get the benefits of both worlds in this. You could still have full DVR access without affecting it as much. I still wouldn't do that if I was doing really low latency. but you can look at doing that. I do recommend, though, if your main target's low latency, don't do a full DVR. At least that's what your other users or your whole users can see. Wowza was interesting and recommended 12 seconds of data in each playlist, and that was down even if they were, irregardless of their segment size at least. I've always said, yeah, you want at least 10 seconds, and I usually want it no less than 20 items in my rolling manifest at the very least. But you can actually have a fair bit more. It's not going to hurt. Wowzer's recommendation was up to 50. Key things that you need to consider this stuff is if people do fall behind or what happens, how do they, what's the user experience for them catching up when you have a rolling DVR. But the idea here is limit your manifest, because the more in your manifest, the more your player has to, and the player is going to run hot to keep low latency. One thing that I found overlooked a lot of times, I've been brought in to help do consulting or review a number of times, and oftentimes one of the things that people just don't seem to use, and it's just an oversight sometimes, this has been pretty large scale stuff too, is that they let things manage doing like the initial bitrate selection automatically in the player framework. A lot of player frameworks will have some type of cool detection system for, okay, which bitrate should I pick out of these? Some of them will use the default of the first item in the manifest, right, top, but not all encoders even support that. And I've always thought that was kind of a bit loosey-goosey, in my opinion. But a lot of players will actually then try to do what they'll pick like the top one, they load that first segment, use that to do their bitrate determination, then they load whichever one they want and play it back. HLS.js by default I think does that as well, and we saw that it adds an extra 1 to 2 seconds of startup, just in that. So we were able to shave stuff off just by taking that out. So my point is something that's just a super simple thing that can easily be overlooked is manually specify what your initial bit rate's going to be. Now that doesn't mean you can't do better for your users, right? A real good concept here is that set that initially if you don't know anything about them, but if you do know something about them, store that persistently, at least on that machine. So for instance, browser-based cookies are great for that. Hey, great, I know that their normal average bit rate was 3 megabit. So I'll make that so now next time they come in, they'll start on that. But if they don't, I'm going to specify a mid-range or a mid-range to low to go from there. If also goal is low latency is priority over some sacrifice of quality, pick a lower bit rate. At least that removes some of the network overhead. Although if they have a fast connection, we know that that isn't necessarily going to be adding up to our problem because we have we've seen those numbers. So you can start on a low to mid-range one. And then if they have the bandwidth, they're just going to get up switched. And if you have good network ABR logic in your player, hopefully that switch happens pretty quickly. The cool thing about using smaller segment sizes, it also does provide an option for players to switch quicker, right? Whereas normally it's going to be a 6-second segment for the ABR algorithm, it's normally going to try to switch on segment changes. Therefore, you have more opportunities for the ABR algorithm to come in there. So you can also increase your aggressiveness of your ABR algorithm oftentimes to be able to help handle that. Although it really depends on the ABR logic underneath and how they're monitoring it and how they're calculating it, because now with these smaller segment sizes, it can also throw it off a little maybe.
Like 0.5. Like 0.5.
Like 0.5? Don't do 0.5. So also, like I said, though, a lot of standard-ish stuff is that, hey, you'll always use the first rendition in the list. I think that's horrible. I don't like that. I try never to actually use that, although it still can happen that way. I still recommend, if you can be more explicit, do so. Now let's talk about some of the more cool stuff a little bit. Who here's heard about HTTP 1.1 chunk transfer coding? Cool. Anyone used it? All right, sweet. Neither have I. I've messed around with it a little bit. And it seems really, really promising. It's kind of where some neat stuff's going on. This is actually what Periscopes started off with using as well. So what is HTTP 1.1 chunks transfer coding? Streaming data transfer mechanism that enables transfer of chunks within a segment before the complete segment is retrieved, or necessarily even available at that point. Player can start receiving portions of segments before it's delivered from the encoder. Okay, cool. So the way I kind of see it is it takes the concept of byte range with segments. So the way I kind of try to imagine this is that you guys understand using byte ranges instead of TS files, right? I see enough heads nod, cool. So what if you could use TS files normally and just leverage that benefit, but byte ranges while it's encoding, so that you don't have to wait that dang 6 seconds just to have that content even be able to start to be delivered, right? So once again, we look back at this, we have this, okay, I'm not going to be able to even try to start loading that content until it's ready, right? And I like having these larger files because they're kind of handy to work with. And they perform good for caching and other stuff. Okay, well, with CMAF, this is an implementation of this is CMAF chunks, also uses HTTP1 chunking. So this is a cool another little diagram from Harmonic and what they were shown on there. So once again, up on top, we have our normal segment. Okay, well, cool. Once it's ready, I can load that. But while it's loading, in CMAF chunks currently available or coming to be available in Dash, not yet for HLS, you can actually set up chunks which give it just a little bit of move data in the beginning and then data chunks as it comes that then fill in to create that whole segment. And you can start doing the concept of pre-announcing content before it's necessarily available. So we'll see how that actually works. So pre-announcing streams and manifests essentially adds segment URLs to the players before they're actually produced. So it's telling the manifest, hey, this data is coming. You can start loading it if you want. We can't guarantee you're going to get it. When combined with chunk transfer coding, it ensures all segments are received as quickly as possible. So when using the chunk transfer coding, what it actually does is it opens up the request to start getting that information as soon as it's told that it can, and keeps that connection semi-persistent open until it starts filling in. Now that was just for Dash, this chunk right here. We're going to talk about what's been made available in HLS here in a second.
I think Phil had something to add.
Phil?
Yes, the way Periscope does that LHLS.
Don't ruin my surprise!
Oh. Hold that thought.
I'm going to get to HLS in a second.
I don't think you talked about that.
Give me a second, and then you can totally jump in if I miss it. That's Phil. He's a good guy.
Yeah.
All right, so caveats to watch out when you're pre-announcing. The idea here is we're saying, hey, content's coming. It may not be available or may be partially available. So using predictive tags impacts the ability for discontinuities and segment durations. Be careful on that. Technically, with the HTTP 1.1 chunking, you can still do your segment durations. But the idea here is if you're telling the manifest that something's available before it's actually necessarily there, if the encoder then has a problem in the middle, you've already told the player, we're good, just load it. It'll be there when I tell you, right? You're losing some reliability. Things like discontinuities can be really key and cause all sorts of problems. If anyone wants to talk more about that, we will in the end, but I want to move through this. ABR calculation limitations. Once again, you're doing things before it's really there. It can impact this stuff. And incredibly important, you need to consider how this could affect your origin. Your system has to be set up for it properly, right? So this is something if you're using with like a CDN, you have to actually talk to them. Do you guys support the HTTP 1.1 chunking? And do you have what would be referred to as an origin shield? The concept here is that requests can come through and they're not going to be able to be fulfilled. If you're doing this on a CDN, if you don't have an origin shield, all those 404s go back to origin, it can take down your origin. You have to have something in there that blocks it. So 404s stay there, and then once content comes through, it then flows out afterwards. That's one of the elements for this. You don't have to do this on a CDN to make this work, but you have to use something similar so that you don't kill your server with this and you have it set up appropriately. So Periscope came up with something called LHLS. Currently, it's delivered over HTTP 1.1 using trunk transfer coding. I think I'll put it on later on. Later on, their plan is actually take this to HTTP 2, which is going to be pretty cool. We can talk briefly about that. But the concept that they did for HLS there is they pre-announced segments, actually 2 or 3 in the future. So there's the only ones actually able to be downloaded. 2 or 3 other ones are already there, predictive-based segments. And the idea is that the players actually then say, OK, go try to load that. And if the first one's there, it's going to actually get the whole bit. If it's not there, what it's going to do, it's going to get just the segment header, and it's going to hold that connection open. Then as soon as the actual bits come in, it's going to stream as it comes in. So these 2-second chunks or whatever are going to actually start flowing directly to the users as they're actually becoming available on the system. Incredibly powerful. And what HTTP 2 is HTTP 2 is going to actually start handling better persistent connection and pooling of those connections. So instead of having separate socket connections for each one of those requests, for instance, which is essentially what's happening underneath, or a persistent connection for each one of those underneath, it's going to be able to pool those and manage that stuff better so that content just comes when it's available. You request it, and it's like, just chill out for a second. Hold on, I'll get it to you. Don't worry about it. And then as soon as it's there, it starts actually flowing in. And it's in a very optimized manner for the most part. Did I miss anything there, Phil?
No, I just didn't see the slide, but you talked about it.
All right, we're good. Sweet. Now, also one of the cool things with this concept, just to know, is if you're actually going to be recording your whole thing and you want that full DVR capabilities, this is actually doing it anyway. You're just automatically making all these fragments ahead of time, and this stuff is already pre-cached and pre-warmed than when you do switch this over to like full event replay, VOD, that type of stuff. So it can be really powerful in that regard. There's a really good article on this. I put this on the bottom too. Now, if we actually look at what happens when you start using LHLS, this is what happens. So the traditional realm for video receives and playback content over here is everything comes in bursts, right? I got 6 seconds or 2 seconds, and I get to play it, right? And it's very ladder. Becomes in the segments. Well, now we're able to actually get a more linear line. We get to keep that consistently going. And then also that means that as we have fluctuation, we're better to handle it as we go versus we have fluctuation at the wrong time, and now our segment got pushed back further. Same thing with buffer. Normally, if you actually monitor your buffer, you're going to see it, OK, fill up, and then it's going to drop down 6 seconds. Oh, got another 6 seconds. And go as we are. Here, we're able to keep a much more consistent realm, which gives us a much better safety barrier as we continue along. So when we take this all together, to me, things like LHLS are incredibly exciting. What you can do with chunk transfer coding, that's really a great way to start looking at what you can achieve. The chunk transfer coding in HTTP 1.1 is available today. It's going to get better with HTTP 2 as that comes available. There are other things that are available as well. As I mentioned, things like Quick, that's actually something that's available in all the Chrome browsers today. It actually leverages a more UDP-based way to be able to receive and deliver content. So this is protocol-based. And it's pretty cool. Akamai has this working on some of their media stuff. Aspera has their new fast protocol as well. So once again, they actually even have a JavaScript library they can integrate with. You're going to need back-end support with this as well. But the idea is everything is really trying to move to more persistent and UDP-based connections in one way or another with resiliency and fillbacking. And that's the benefit of UDP, that it's fast, but it's not so reliable. So there's ways that people are extending upon that. That's where things are headed for new system infrastructure and protocol support, but it isn't there yet. It's starting to. This is where you can do this if you want to right now. The WoWs protocol, that's the other realm of where a lot of things are going, that they're using the WebSocket technology as a means to transfer the bits in and out, and then by making sure that those bits stream through there in the same concept of what the HTTP chunking is doing, becomes also really key. So I have our information over here, and we have just a perfect amount of time for some questions and so forth. What can I do you for? Yes? You, in the purple shirt.
How much of this works in a DRM-focused environment?
Why is DRM always got to ruin my day? In theory, it should be fine. So, all right, most of our stuff right now is HLS-driven. HLS is a challenge over anything other than fair play for DRM. That doesn't mean it's not possible. If we look at this from a CMAF perspective and FMP4, then we can start actually doing this with DRM. The biggest concern with DRM is just the potential additional overhead for client and also packaging and encrypting. But none of this is prohibitive from a DRM perspective aside from that. Yes?
Did you do any fragmented MP4 tests?
Repeat the question.
So the question was, did we do anything with fragmented MP4 for the test? They generally, I can't remember if in our packaging stuff, did we actually do fragmented MP4?
No, not for this.
Yeah.
For a different session, we did look into some fragmented MP4, but these tester apps that we used, they're configured to report to a reporting server. So switching it over to a fragmented stream would be pretty easy to test out.
And everything here applies the same there. The benefit, sorry, go ahead.
I just wonder if you're doing fragmented MP4, you can download a single file. You don't have to keep
Right.
asking,
You don't have to worry about like the move stuff in there because that's essentially what it's doing. And that's a benefit of that. And that's the ultimate goal is you can use this exact same stuff with that in the HTTP 1.1 chunking and range stuff to stream that stuff through. And it's going to be less of a headache because you don't have to have as much potentially set up on the backside for returning out headers or whatnot because it's going to have that. Although you still, if you're doing how far you pre-announce, you'll still have to deal with some of that. Anything else? Well, you guys just scored next. Yes.
When you were saying the problem with the full DVR window, was the issue simply that the larger file size takes longer to download, and that's why it's bad for latency?
So it's a really good question. The question is around when you have a full DVR, what is the negative using the full DVR versus a rolling DVR, limited DVR window from the implications of a latency and performance, right? So it can be twofold. One is how big the file is and potential network load with that to some degree, and or any time delay in the encoder creating that, which normally isn't an issue. So yes, it can be a little bit over just bits over wire. Most of what we've seen on that, though, is every time that's loaded, so on a live manifest, it's every X amount of seconds, every fragment size. It's going to be additional processing on the client and the player, and that can have an implication to that. So keeping that as light as possible, both for over the wire and on client performance potential implications, is better. Does that mean it should be a problem? No, especially on the client, it shouldn't be. Some platforms more so than others. Web being probably one of the bigger ones when you're not using a native player. But it still can have impact. And generally the idea is you want everything as light and small as it can be. But it's not like a critical point either.
We did this to an extreme on our platform. We did a 24-hour HLS live stream, and the manifest file was 9-second segments got so large.
Right.
Clients were timing out.
Yeah. So we see, I mean, a lot of the sports stuff that we work on, the streams are over 6 hours, and they're 6-second segments. It adds up, and the manifest requests for time to cache through network and everything else that has happened, it adds up. And we see crap, a second and a half just to load the manifest, and we're already behind the ball. Yeah?
When you started doing the low latency segmentation of the small segment sizes, at what point, or did you see certain devices more susceptible to buffer overruns?
Older devices can have a bit more of a challenge. We didn't, on the recent test we did, we didn't test as much on a device spectrum on different platforms. But we have seen a lot where older devices are going to have a much more challenge keeping up with a low latency stream because you're trying to feed it stuff more quickly in the processing there. Then also things like full DVRs and so forth can have more impact on those as well. But there wasn't, I'd say, a really solid definitive line. A lot of that also depends on what your encoding profile is and the hardware you're running it on.
I was testing buffer health across devices, and I almost never saw buffer overruns on the TOC devices.
Yeah. It depends on the device. So like sticks, we've seen all sorts of buffer issues on those guys, but boxes of the same platform, so I'm talking Fire, Roku, whatever, we're generally fine. But once again, it also depends on the rendition levels that it hit and what's our scale, right? With some of the stuff we work on, like it's massive scale, and we've seen where we actually end up having this latency and in the end discontinuities and so forth that show up in the manifest simply because of the ingest to Akamai. That this is large-scale events. Networks are getting overloaded just at a point of level unless you have a direct connection to Akamai on your, so if you're using public IP, their ingest points can get overloaded. Now, Akamai, that doesn't normally happen, but it can. Like the ingest alone can be a point. It's not just Akamai, this could be anybody with this internet congestion points and so forth. So all this stuff can add up in the weirdest ways that you wouldn't expect.
Was it an RTMP stream?
No.
HLS?
Yeah. Anyone else? If anyone wants, feel free to come up, grab a business card. You can always hit us up if you have any questions. Hope you guys enjoyed Streaming Media West, and have a good day.